guys, welcome to another episode of BAM GPG. I'm your host, Bryson.
And I'll be your co-host, Ben.
And today we're going to talk about some potential Packers wide receivers. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe.
And you can also give us a follow on TikTok and check out some of our content on there. You can find us there at bam.brands on TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and dive into this here, Bryson. So as Bryson opened up with here, we've touched on it a little bit in some of our previous episodes here, but really want to take a deeper dive into some potential wide receiver ones, if you would. Targets for Green Bay this offseason. We'll look at some of the potential free agents as well as, a potential trade target. His name's been out there a little bit this offseason. Yep, Davante Adams and DK Metcalf. And then we'll take a look at some of the potential free agents, assuming that there isn't a franchise tag in place, which would then, if we're going to acquire them, turn into a trade scenario. But we'll go ahead and take a look at that. We'll start off here with Davante. So Davante Adams,
overall grade 75.8, receiving grade 76.8, and targets he got 135 targets, 85 receptions, 10,063 yards.
So 1,063 yards, and he had 8 receiving touchdowns.
Decent season.
Yeah, pretty decent season, considering he spent half of it with a
Raiders.
Pretty lackluster Raiders offense, to say the least. But yeah, I mean, pretty solid numbers. You look at his age, and he certainly doesn't play at his age. I mean, he certainly appears to be still putting up those wide receiver one numbers. He would instantly step back into Green Bay and assume that role of wide receiver one again. You look at his overall grade; it's 30th amongst 98 qualifying receivers. Receiving grade, 30th amongst 98. And then his target was actually 10th in the league.
Pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. In receptions, he's 14th. Receiving yards, 15th. And again, you got to take a look at those receiving yards and really kind of peel back layers of that onion. He probably would have been a 1,400 yard wide receiver this year if he would have been on the Jets from the jump, right?
Yeah.
So, again, pretty solid season out of Davante. Absolutely would be a wide receiver one for us. It's one of those things, if we were able to trade for him, we'd have to look at, restructuring his contract a little bit to make it more team friendly. But certainly, in a guy like Davante, given his age, you're probably not going to have to give up a 1 or a 2 for him.
Maybe like a 3.
I could see a 3, with a conditional third, possibly, depending on his availability and performance this upcoming season. That could possibly turn into a 2. It may just be a third, but conditional picks seem to be the trend that teams are kind of moving towards. So I could see that happening if that was a possibility. Yeah, absolutely. So the other guy, a potential trade target for Green Bay, whose names came up, is DK Metcalf. So
overall grade 74.3, pretty good.
Yep.
Receiving grade 75, a little bit above average. Both of them are a little bit above average. And targets 108, 108, pretty decent. Receptions 66. Receiving yards 992. Not quite 1,000. Almost.
Yep.
992. And then receiving touchdowns 5. So he was 24th in targets, 32nd in receptions, 22nd in receiving yards, and 39th in receiving touchdowns and overall grade 33rd and receiving grade 36th.
Yeah, so pretty solid stats. He would certainly warrant probably that number one spot, if Green Bay were to trade for him. And then you kind of look at a guy like him, right? So uh, with Christian Watson, he's kind of our over the top guy, the guy that's kind of our big play hitter down the field, given his, height and his athletic ability. And very similar to DK Metcalf, right? Big receiver. 6'3", 229. You hear those numbers, you think of a tight end, but DK Metcalf certainly has a speed, size of a tight end, and has a speed of a wide receiver. So certainly,
but we do not need a tight end.
No, we're pretty solid with Tucker Kraft, but I mean, certainly is a guy that can take the top off the defense. It's a guy that can beat man coverage. It's a guy that opposing defenses have to game plan for. So he would absolutely be a welcome addition to Green Bay. He's another guy, similar to Adams, probably not going to take a real high draft pick. And I say real high. So you're probably looking at a third round. So top 100 pick in the draft, right? So third round, possibly turn it into a conditional pick where, it could float between a second and fourth, but probably land somewhere within the third round pick for him. But it'd be an interesting one. And he is coming up on if I remember correctly, he's coming up on a contract year. So, that could be something that plays a factor into a trade too. Is Green Bay willing to give up a third round pick for a 1-year rental, essentially? Or is it something where, we're going to trade for you, but we want to sign you to an extension right away, right? Even 2-year extension, right? Trade for you. We're giving up a top 100 pick in the third round. We want to get 2 years service from you. So a lot of possibilities there, but another thing you have to look at too is the salary cap for that. So the receivers we have now are on pretty team-friendly contracts, right? They're still under initial contracts. So
the only problem with our wide receiver, we don't have a true number one.
No, currently we don't. That's 100% correct. So
there's a couple people battling for number 2 right now.
There are. Romeo Doubs certainly in that conversation.
Christian Watson.
Yeah, a healthy Christian Watson. Jaden Reed. He certainly has that potential to. In a guy like
we have two or three people fighting for the number 3 too. Bo Melton, Dontavian Wicks.
Yeah.
And Malik Heath for number 3.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a plethora of depth for the Green Bay's wide receivers. They're just truly missing that number one, right? So have plenty of depth. You got plenty of playmakers. Just we don't have that one. That game's on the line. We need you to come down with a catch, beat that man coverage. We don't have that guy on the team right now. So this is why I think and I think you agree with me, Bryson, that we need to explore, bringing in that guy. So, a couple initial ones, Davante Adams, DK Metcalf, right? So those two guys certainly fill that role. Now, third guy, interesting one. We've talked about him too. Higgins from Cincinnati.
His overall grade, 88.2, 5th out of 98 receivers. Receiving grade, 88.3, 7th out of 98 receivers. And then targets, 104, 27th. And then reception, 73, 24th. And then receiving yards, 911. It's kind of weird because it's like 911.
It is kind of an odd number, isn't it?
Yeah, and then for receiving yards, he's 28th in the league. And then receiving touchdowns, double digits, 10. 5th in the league for that.
Yeah, so he certainly had a great season on all accounts, right? So His overall graded out was 88.2, like you mentioned. That would rank him fifth amongst 98 qualifying wide receivers. So,
Pretty good.
yeah, absolutely. Now, the age in Higgins, certainly favorable compared to some of these other wide receivers that we mentioned before. He's 26 years old. Another guy that has size, and we're going to be missing that this year with Christian Watson being out. 6'4", 219. 219 pounds. So you certainly got the size, we're looking for right there. One concern with him, same thing we've had with Watson, the injuries. Right? He seems to be riddled with a plethora of injuries, throughout his early career here. So that would be the one concern with him.
One thing I want to talk about, go down up a little bit. Go to that bar graph right there. Up. Like those teams. Oh yeah, those are the teams he played against.
Yeah,
I see.
Yeah, so I mean, he's certainly, if he's healthy, can stay in the field. I mean, he's a difference maker, right? So, outside of the Bengals where they have Jamar Chase, you put him on, most 30 other NFL teams, 29 other NFL teams. He's probably the number one wide receiver on that team.
Yeah.
So. Which would include Green Bay. So certainly an interesting one. I don't think he's a guy that Cincinnati just lets walk in free agents. At the very least, you're probably looking at seeing him franchise tagged, and if they do move on from him, that would require a tag and trade scenario for him. But certainly a guy that's probably going to warrant some money. And again, is that going to be something Green Bay wants to do? Right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to give up.
Number one wide receiver. Yeah.
You're going to have to give up draft capital, and then when you do pay that higher salary, that's also going to be taking out of the bucket for other positions of need, right? So kind of got to weigh that out a little bit. But another guy I wanted to talk about here, that interesting one, Chris Godwin, Bryson. He graded out at 86.3.
10th in the league. Receiving grade 85.7, and targets he got 68th in the league. Receptions 50th in the league. Receiving yards 576, 58th in the league. And then receiving touchdowns 5th, 39th in the league. He was first in drops in the league. Point that out.
Yeah, which is good. Didn't have any. That's excellent, actually.
Yeah.
So PFF doesn't have him graded for having any drops this season, which is pretty wild for a guy that's had 60 targets, 50 receptions, to have 0 drops. Pretty reliable hands, I would say. Looking at that. But yeah, I mean, a pretty solid season. 576 yards. Certainly didn't have nearly as many. He didn't have as many targets or yards or touchdowns as some of the other guys, but his on-field production when he was on the field, you're looking 86.3 grade. It's fantastic. His receiving
0 drops sticks out to me a lot.
Yeah, 0 drops is fantastic. I mean, you go to a guy like Davante Adams, has some sure hands himself. He had 10 drops this season. Even let's take a look at DK Metcalf here. Only 3 drops on the year. It's pretty solid.
Yeah.
Right? So that's not bad at all. T. Higgins had 2 drops this year. He had almost double the targets. So, some pretty solid, sure-handed wide receivers. Another interesting one here, and again, I don't know if it's a guy that Buffalo allows him to walk or not, but Amari Cooper.
Yeah. 68.34 overall grade. 61st. Below average, so that's bad. Receiving grade 69. 61st, still below average. Targets 82. 45th in the league receptions. 44 receptions. 61st in the league. Receiving yards 547, 64th in the league. Receiving touchdowns, 447th in the league. And then drops,
So this would be the concerning one, yeah. So his drops were a little bit elevated. He had 8 drops on 82 targets. So
That's
roughly,
bad.
yeah, it's not great. But looking at the last two here, so Chris Godwin, Amari Cooper, right? Both pretty solid wide receivers. I don't feel like you're getting that true number one with them. I think they just kind of fall into that bucket with the rest of our wide receivers. They're very similar to like a Romeo Dobbs.
Higgins, DK Metcalf, and Davante Adams. They're all number ones, true.
I would agree. So the first three we talked about today here, Davante Adams, DK Metcalf, T. Higgins, those three are going to fall under that bucket of, number one wide receiver. The receivers that are able to, make plays down the field. Win that one-on-one coverage. No, and, we sort of did with Christian Watson, right? So he had that big body.
Just always hurt.
He is. So his injuries have been, concerning, but when he is on the field, his athleticism and size allows him to do some pretty amazing things on the field. But
that's just the one problem. He's always hurt. If he wasn't hurt that much, and he'd be a true number one.
Yep. So hopefully, hopefully we can get Watson back, week 12 or later next season. But, there's usually a little bit of ramp up time coming off a long injury like that. So, probably not looking at seeing the 100% Christian Watson next season. Will probably be the year after that. So I truly feel Green Bay probably needs to go out and make a move at wide receiver this offseason.
Sign him to a little 1 or 2 year deal.
Yeah, because
And I'm thinking, I've said this in previous shows, I think, but I think they get, Davante, and then they go out and draft a wide receiver, and then send Davante to a 2 year deal, and then put the rookie at the number 2, and then eventually, when Davante's done with his 2 year deal, then the wide receiver will just be starting the line.
Yeah. That draft and develop. And, I feel like Green Bay's probably already drafted, some of those wide receivers that, could potentially down the road a year or two from now assume that number one role, with Romeo, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks even. I'm a big fan of Wicks. As long as he can correct those drop passes, which he seemed to do towards the end of the season. I mean, fantastic route runner. He runs some crisp routes. Yeah, kind of go back and play some of the tape on him, watch some of his games. Runs fantastic routes, right? So the one concern over him is just kind of it. And if you remember back early in Davante Adams' career with Green Bay, his first couple seasons with Green Bay, that was a major concern with him was his drop passes. So he was able to clean that up and, was certainly, top 1, top 2 wide receiver in the league for multiple seasons with the Packers.
Hopefully it's the same for Dontavian Wicks.
Yep. So hopeful on him, definitely positive on him. But, the one concerning thing with, acquiring that number 1 wide receiver is, you're going to have to give up some draft capital. Is it going to have to be a first or second round pick? No, I don't think so, but
maybe
probably going to be a third round pick, which is still a valuable pick in the draft. I mean, you're talking about players like Tucker Kraft, for an example. Would you be willing to trade Tucker Kraft for DK Metcalf? I don't think so. Right? Yeah. Tucker Kraft's on a cheaper contract. He's a younger player. Certainly got a lot more. I personally think Kraft's got a lot more upside than Metcalf. As far as value to the team. So those are kind of the things you got to weigh. The higher contract, you're giving up potential good talent. You never know when you're going to snag one of those guys, such as Tucker Kraft.
Tom Brady was 7th round.
Right. So, sometimes, some of these picks are probably overvalued sometimes. I mean, would you trade DK Metcalf or Davante Adams for Jordan Morgan, who we took in the first round this year?
Yeah.
I would, I would, right now, I would certainly say yes to that.
Yeah.
So absolutely. Or would you trade T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, Davante, any of those three? Would you trade them for Lucas Van Ness? I think the answer is yes, right?
Yeah.
So it's one of those tough scenarios, you could be giving up a potential young superstar with those picks, such as like a Tucker
But
Kraft,
at the same
or
time, you could be giving up a bust.
you could, yeah. So that's a risk you take with it, and then you're also taking on a higher salary. So I mean, if you draft a guy like Edgerrin Cooper in the third round again, you're a guy with tremendous upside, definitely a playmaker from day one on the field. You're you're playing him on a team friendly contract where you're able to kind of build around him in some of the other areas. So
one guy I really want to see come out next year like really good. That one running back we got from the second one, I can't remember his name.
Marshawn Lloyd.
Yeah, that guy.
Yeah, so he's a guy I'm excited about too. I was pretty hopeful that he'd make it back to the field this season. It just seemed to just be injury after injury. I know he dealt with some hamstring things and then the appendicitis, so he certainly had a tough rookie season.
He did get some snaps in the preseason.
He did get some of the preseason, and then kind of looking back at his USC days, he averaged over 7 yards per carry in college, which is if we could get similar production in the next level in the NFL, that would be fantastic. It'd be a great 1-2 punch with him and Josh Jacobs, absolutely. So, talking about salaries, some of these higher guys. So where does Green Bay sit right now in salary cap? Well, pretty good.
253.
Yeah, so that's our total cap right now. So our available cap space right now, actually 13th. This is the healthiest Green Bay's been in a long time. Getting out of that Aaron Rodgers dead cap money. So we're sitting, 43 million, almost 44 million positive in cap this season. So what's that mean? Green Bay's got some money to spend, right? But you also have to. Gunikis, he's got to look at the season, right? You want to get the best available players you can for the team, but you're also going to have to look at beyond this season too, right? So you're going to have some players, a lot of these younger players that we mentioned already, wide receivers, a lot of the defensive players, they're going to be coming up off their rookie contracts, and asking for they're going to get a payday, right? So you got to have available cap for when that does come up, but certainly have some flexibility, a lot more flexibility than we've had in previous years. Interesting one. So if you look at Green Bay's, some of their big hitters in their cap right now. So obviously Jordan Love with his new contract in the offseason, he's got a $29 million cap hit. Rashawn Gary second with a 25, and then third guy on the list here who I think
do not resign.
Yeah, well, I mean he's on the team, right? He's under contract, but I just don't see him coming back with the Packers next year. Is Jair Alexander? He's got a $25.4 million cap hit. So again, if that's a contract where we're able to move on from after the season, I mean that would give us the flexibility of spending a little bit this offseason, not having to worry about some future contracts down the road, right? Because that would free up, that $25 million cap hit down the road. So some of the other players,
they have like 68 million.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm pretty sure.
Yep. And then as we talked before, you really can't, if you're looking to avoid the dead cap hit this year for Jair, you're looking at that June 1st deadline, right? So he's probably not going to be moved before the draft because Green Bay's not going to want to eat that $19 million cap hit for this season for him. So if you're going to move on from Jair, it's probably going to be after June 1st. But certainly there's availability to make that cap space even higher, right? Moving into the next year and the years beyond that. So certainly should be an interesting offseason, like we mentioned before, finding that consistent edge rush and, potential number one wide receiver. I personally feel like we have the flex, looking at our cap space right now and then, the possibility of moving on from Jair Alexander. I certainly think we have the potential to go out and make some splashes this offseason.
Mm-hmm.
So like we did yesterday, Bryson talking about, some of the defensive ends, what are your predictions for next year? Who do you think Green Bay goes out and pushes hard to acquire this offseason?
I feel like this will be a long shot.
Okay.
Like less than 1%. I'd like to get Dexter Lawrence, but
okay,
it's like less than 1%.
Yeah. Yep. So realistically, though, so if you're looking at some of the wide receivers we covered here, which one do you think is the most realistic for Green Bay to go out and acquire this offseason?
My opinion, Davante most likely. Higgins.
Okay. Yeah. So again, either one of those guys, certainly wouldn't have any complaints on our end from them. When I take a look at all these guys, certainly Davante would make a lot of sense, with his connections to Green Bay. He's still playing at a solid level, right? And I don't think he's necessarily it's not going to take a lot of draft capital to grab him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think he would be a player that, but not a lot, but I think he'd potentially be willing to work out more of a team-friendly contract for Green Bay, hopefully. So if that is the case. But another interesting one would be, to me, the other guy where Higgins, I think you're going to have to give up some draft capital to acquire. But the other guy that makes a lot of sense to me is DK Metcalf, right? So he's a guy coming into the last year of his contract. So, Seattle's, I would assume, they got a solid number one out there right now. So I would assume that, Seattle would be open to trades for DK Metcalf. So a guy that's not going to warrant, much draft capital to acquire. So I think that's certainly a real possibility. He's got the size, got the speed you're looking for. So for me, it comes down, if we're truly looking at adding a wide receiver one, it's coming down for me between Davante Adams, DK Metcalf, if we're looking at the trade route.
Really?
Personally, that's kind of where I see. Probably on this one, I would probably, just because of age, I would probably lean towards DK Metcalf because you're looking at a 27-year-old with size, with speed, compared to Davante Adams, 32, going to be 33. And I think DK turns 28, towards the end of the season or the latter part of the season anyway. So for me, what makes the most sense is probably DK Metcalf out of them, right? So you're not giving up a lot of draft capital. And I say that only if Green Bay is able to kind of a trade and sign, right? Green Bay typically doesn't do rentals, right? So I couldn't see us giving up a third-round pick for a one-year rental, essentially, right? I think if they were going to make this trade, it would have to be under the assurance that he had the intentions to sign for 2 years and beyond with Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of my thoughts on it. Let us know what you think, but should be an interesting one. And then we'll be back with some more. Maybe we'll kind of take a look at the defensive side on our next episode, see what's available out there. But again, let us know what you think, and
and as always,
go Pack Go.